was cast aside, unwanted by her own husband, and left to survive in a cruel world alone. But something unexpected was about to change her fate forever. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The cold wind swept through the stone corridors of Thornmere Castle, carrying with it the whispers of servants and the heavy weight of judgment. Lady Elara Whitmore stood before the tall window of her chamber, her slender fingers pressed against the frost-covered glass as she gazed out at the barren landscape beyond. The trees were skeletal against the gray winter sky, their branches reaching upward like desperate hands seeking mercy from an indifferent heaven. Her reflection stared back at her, pale and haunting, framed by waves of auburn hair that cascaded down her shoulders like molten copper. Her emerald eyes, once bright with hope and dreams, now held the dull sheen of resignation and sorrow. She wore a gown of deep burgundy wool, its fabric heavy and rich, lined with soft gray fur at the collar and cuffs. The dress was cinched at her narrow waist with a leather belt adorned with silver embroidery, and the sleeves fell in elegant folds to her wrists. Despite the quality of her clothing, despite the status her marriage had once promised, Elara felt like nothing more than a ghost haunting the halls of a place that had never truly been her home. 3 years had passed since she had wed Lord Thomas Whitmore, the eldest son of the Duke of Thornmere, and in those 3 years she had failed in the one duty that mattered most to the noble houses of England. She had not given him an heir. The door to her chamber opened without ceremony, and Elara turned to see her lady's maid, Margaret, entering with a tray of bread and cheese. The older woman's face was kind but lined with worry, her gray hair tucked beneath a simple linen cap. Margaret had served Elara since she was a child in her father's modest manor, and she was one of the few people in this cold fortress who still looked at her with compassion rather than contempt. "My lady, you must eat something," Margaret said softly, setting the tray on the small wooden table near the hearth. "You've barely touched your meals these past days." Elara offered a weak smile, though it did not reach her eyes. "I have no appetite, Margaret, but I thank you for your concern." Margaret moved closer, her weathered hands reaching out to gently touch Elara's arm. "Do not let their cruel words poison your spirit, my dear. You are worth far more than what their narrow minds can see." Before Elara could respond, heavy footsteps echoed in the corridor outside, and both women turned toward the door. Lord Thomas entered, his tall frame filling the doorway. He was a handsome man by any measure, with sharp features, dark hair that fell just past his shoulders, and eyes the color of stormy seas. He wore a tunic of dark green leather over a shirt of fine linen, and a heavy cloak lined with wolf fur hung from his broad shoulders. His face, however, was set in an expression of cold displeasure that had become all too familiar to Elara. "Leave us," Thomas commanded, his voice brooking no argument. Margaret hesitated for only a moment before curtsying and hurrying from the room, casting one last worried glance at Elara before closing the door behind her. The silence that followed was oppressive, broken only by the crackling of the fire in the hearth. Thomas crossed the room with measured steps, his boots heavy against the stone floor, and Elara felt her heart constrict with dread. She knew what was coming. She had heard variations of this conversation countless times before. "My father has made his decision," Thomas said, his tone flat and devoid of emotion. "You are to leave Thornmere by the end of the week. The marriage will be annulled on the grounds of barrenness, and I am to take a new wife by spring." The words struck Elara like physical blows, even though she had been expecting them. For weeks she had felt the walls closing in, had sensed the growing impatience and anger from Thomas and his family. The Duke had made no secret of his disappointment, and the Duchess had become increasingly cold and hostile, treating Elara as little more than a servant who had failed in her duties. Still, hearing the words spoken aloud made them terrifyingly real. "Where am I to go?" Elara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "My father's estate was forfeit to pay his debts. I have no family, no home to return to." Thomas turned away, his jaw tight. "That is no longer my concern. You will be given a small purse of coins and a horse. What you do with them is your own affair. Perhaps you can find work in a convent, or seek charity from some distant relation. I care not, as long as you are gone from this place." Elara felt tears prick at her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. "I have been a faithful wife to you, Thomas. I have done everything asked of me. The fault of having no children may not lie solely with me. Have you considered that? His head snapped around, and for a moment, fury blazed in his eyes. Do not dare to question my virility, woman. I am a Whitmore, descended from a long line of strong, fertile men. The failure is yours alone. You are barren, and therefore worthless to this family. The cruelty of his words cut deep, but Elara straightened her spine and met his gaze with as much dignity as she could muster. Then I will leave as you wish. But know this, Thomas Whitmore. I will not spend the rest of my days hiding in shame for a circumstance beyond my control. I will find my own path, and I will survive. Thomas scoffed, his lip curling in disdain. Survive? You are a woman of noble birth with no family, no dowry, and no prospects. You will be fortunate if you do not end up begging in the streets or worse. Do not delude yourself with notions of independence. The world is harsh to women like you. With that, he turned and strode from the room, leaving Elara alone once more. She stood there for a long moment, her hands trembling, before finally allowing the tears to come. They flowed silently down her cheeks as she sank onto the edge of her bed, her body shaking with the force of her grief and anger. Everything she had known, everything she had been taught to value, was being stripped away. She was being cast out, discarded like a broken tool that no longer served its purpose. Margaret returned a short while later, her eyes red-rimmed as if she too had been weeping. She said nothing, simply wrapped her arms around Elara and held her as she cried. When the tears finally subsided, Elara pulled away and wiped her face with the back of her hand. I will need to prepare, she said, her voice hoarse but steady. I have only a few days. Margaret nodded, her expression resolute. I will help you, my lady. We will pack what you can carry and ensure you have warm clothing for the journey. Where will you go? Elara shook her head. I do not know. Perhaps to the south, where the climate is warmer and there may be more opportunities. I have heard there are towns where a woman with some education might find work as a scribe or a teacher. It is a slim hope, but it is all I have. Over the next few days, Elara and Margaret worked in quiet determination to prepare for her departure. They selected the warmest and most practical garments from Elara's wardrobe, along with a few pieces of jewelry that might be sold if the need arose. The castle's inhabitants watched her with a mixture of pity and scorn, whispering behind their hands as she passed. Some of the younger servants seemed genuinely sad to see her go, but most simply looked away, uncomfortable with the reminder of how quickly fortunes could change. On the morning of her departure, Elara, dressed in a traveling gown of dark blue wool, layered over a linen shift and a leather corset that provided both warmth and support. Over this, she wore a heavy cloak of charcoal gray, lined with rabbit fur and fastened at the throat with a simple bronze clasp. Her hair was braided and pinned beneath a woolen hood, and she carried a leather satchel containing her few possessions. Margaret accompanied her to the courtyard, where a chestnut mare stood waiting, already saddled and laden with a small pack of provisions. The Duke and Duchess were conspicuously absent, a final insult that Elara noted with grim acceptance. Thomas stood near the gate, his arms crossed over his chest, his expression unreadable. As Elara mounted the horse, he stepped forward and held out a small leather purse. As promised, he said curtly, "It is enough for a few weeks, if you are frugal. After that, you are on your own." Elara took the purse without a word, tucking it into her satchel. She looked down at Margaret, who was struggling to hold back tears, and reached down to clasp her hand one last time. "Be safe, my lady," Margaret whispered, "and know that you will always be in my prayers." "And you in mine," Elara replied, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for everything, Margaret. You have been more than a servant to me. You have been a friend." With that, she turned the horse toward the gate and urged it forward. She did not look back as she rode through the archway and down the long, winding path that led away from Thornmere Castle. The sky above was heavy with gray clouds, and a light snow had begun to fall, dusting the ground with a thin layer of white. The cold air bit at her cheeks, and she pulled her cloak tighter around her shoulders, her mind racing with uncertainty and fear. She traveled for hours along the narrow roads that cut through the English countryside, passing through dense forests of oak and ash, their branches bare and skeletal in the winter light. Occasionally, she would pass a small village or a solitary farmstead, but she did not stop. She wanted to put as much distance between herself and Thornmere as possible before nightfall. The landscape around her was bleak and unforgiving, reflecting the turmoil in her heart. She felt unmoored, adrift in a world that had no place for a woman in her position. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the frozen ground, Elara finally allowed herself to slow her pace. She had reached the edge of a large forest, and in the distance, she could see the faint glow of firelight from what appeared to be a roadside inn. Relief flooded through her, and she urged her horse forward, her body aching from the long hours in the saddle. The inn was a modest structure of timber and stone, with smoke rising from its chimney and the warm glow of firelight spilling from its windows. A weathered sign hung above the door, depicting a sleeping hound. Elara dismounted and led her horse to the small stable attached to the side of the building, where a young boy emerged to take the reins. "I need a room for the night," Elara said, pressing a few coins into the boy's hand. "And see that my horse is fed and watered." The boy nodded eagerly and led the mare into the stable while Elara made her way to the inn's entrance. She pushed open the heavy wooden door and stepped inside, greeted by a rush of warmth and the smell of roasting meat and ale. The common room was filled with travelers and locals, their voices a low hum of conversation. A few heads turned to look at her as she entered, and she felt the weight of their curious gazes. She approached the innkeeper, a round man with a balding head and a stained apron, and requested a room and a meal. He eyed her with a mixture of interest and suspicion, clearly unused to seeing a woman of her obvious station traveling alone, but he accepted her coin and directed her to a small table near the hearth. Elara sank onto the wooden bench, grateful to be off her feet, and waited for the serving girl to bring her food. As she sat there, warming her hands by the fire, she could not help but reflect on how drastically her life had changed in such a short time. Just days ago, she had been the lady of a great castle, surrounded by servants and luxury. Now, she was alone, homeless, and uncertain of what the future held. But beneath the fear and sorrow, a small spark of determination began to kindle. She would not allow herself to be defeated. She would find a way to survive, to build a new life for herself, no matter how difficult the path ahead might be. The serving girl arrived with a bowl of stew and a chunk of bread, and Elara ate slowly, savoring the warmth and nourishment. Around her, the inn's patrons continued their conversations, oblivious to the silent struggle playing out in her heart. She finished her meal and retired to the small room upstairs, a cramped space with a narrow bed and a single window overlooking the forest. As she lay down beneath the rough woolen blanket, Elara stared up at the ceiling, her mind filled with questions and doubts. Where would she go? What would she do? And most importantly, could she truly forge a new path for herself in a world that saw her as nothing more than a failure? She did not have the answers, but as sleep finally claimed her, she made herself a silent vow. She would not give up. She would not allow the cruelty of others to define her worth. And somehow, some way, she would find her place in this world. The morning sun broke through the heavy clouds, casting pale light across the frost-covered landscape as Elara prepared to continue her journey. She had slept fitfully, her dreams plagued by images of Thornmere Castle and the cold faces of those who had cast her aside. Now, as she descended the narrow stairs of the inn, she felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down upon her shoulders once more. The common room was quieter than it had been the previous evening, with only a few early travelers breaking their fast with bread and ale. Elara purchased some provisions from the innkeeper, dried meat and hard cheese wrapped in cloth, along with a skin of water for the road ahead. The innkeeper's wife, a plump woman with kind eyes, noticed Elara's fine clothing despite its travel-worn appearance and approached her with concern etched across her weathered face. "Begging your pardon, my lady, but it's dangerous for a woman to travel these roads alone," the woman said quietly, glancing around to ensure no one else was listening. "There are bandits in the forests and worse, men who would take advantage of someone in your position. You should seek an escort, or at least travel with a merchant caravan if you can find one." Elara nodded, appreciating the genuine concern in the woman's voice. "I understand the risks, but I have little choice in the matter. I must reach the southern towns, and I cannot afford to hire guards. I will be careful and stay to the main roads as much as possible." The innkeeper's wife shook her head sadly but said no more, simply pressing an extra loaf of bread into Elara's hands before returning to her duties. Elara tucked the bread into her satchel and made her way to the stable, where the young boy had already prepared her horse. The chestnut mare seemed rested and eager to move, stamping her hooves against the frozen ground as Elara mounted and turned her toward the road that led deeper into the realm. The landscape changed gradually as she traveled, the dense forests giving way to rolling hills and open fields covered in a blanket of snow. The road was rutted and treacherous in places, forcing Elara to guide her horse carefully to avoid patches of ice that gleamed like glass in the morning light. She passed few other travelers, most of them farmers with carts laden with winter vegetables or merchants hurrying to reach the next town before nightfall. None paid her much attention, too focused on their own concerns to spare more than a passing glance at the lone woman on horseback. As the day wore on, the temperature dropped and the wind picked up, cutting through Elara's cloak with icy fingers. She pulled the fabric tighter around herself and pressed on, her thoughts turning to the question that had haunted her since leaving Thornmere. What kind of life could she build for herself? She had been raised to be a lady, educated in music, embroidery, and the management of a household. These skills were valuable within the confines of noble society, but they meant little in the wider world where survival depended on more practical abilities. She could read and write, which was more than most common folk could claim, and she had a basic understanding of numbers and accounting. Perhaps she could find work as a tutor for the children of wealthy merchants, or as a scribe in a town where such services were needed. The thought gave her a small measure of hope, though she knew the reality would likely be far more difficult than she imagined. Women in her position were vulnerable, and there would be many who would seek to exploit her desperation. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon when Elara crested a hill and saw, spread out in the valley below, the town of Ravens Hollow. It was larger than the villages she had passed through, with clusters of timber and stone buildings surrounding a central market square. Smoke rose from dozens of chimneys, and even from this distance, she could hear the faint sounds of activity, the ringing of a blacksmith's hammer, the lowing of cattle, the calls of merchants hawking their wares. Relief washed over her, and she urged her horse down the slope toward the town. As she drew closer, she could see that Ravens Hollow was a prosperous place, its streets busy with people going about their daily business. The buildings were well maintained, their thatched roofs in good repair, and the marketplace was filled with stalls selling everything from fresh fish to bolts of cloth. It was the kind of place where someone like her might be able to disappear, to start over without attracting too much attention. She guided her horse through the crowded streets, searching for an inn where she might secure lodging for a few nights while she considered her next steps. Near the edge of the market square, she found a respectable-looking establishment called the Silver Stag, its sign bearing the image of a proud deer standing against a backdrop of mountains. She dismounted and led her horse to the stable yard, where a grizzled old man took the reins and promised to see the animal properly cared for. Inside, the inn was warm and inviting, with a large hearth dominating one wall and tables scattered throughout the common room. The innkeeper, a tall man with graying hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, greeted her with professional courtesy and showed her to a small but clean room on the second floor. Elara paid for 3 nights' lodging, hoping that would give her enough time to find some sort of work or opportunity. That evening, she sat in the common room with a bowl of mutton stew, listening to the conversations around her and trying to glean information about the town and its inhabitants. She learned that Ravens Hollow was a trading hub, situated at the crossroads of several important routes, and that it was governed by a minor lord named Barren Blackwood, who maintained a small keep on the outskirts of town. The Baron was said to be a fair but stern ruler, more interested in maintaining order and collecting taxes than in the intrigues of court politics. As Elara finished her meal, she noticed a well-dressed woman sitting alone at a nearby table, sipping wine and reviewing what appeared to be a ledger. The woman was perhaps 10 years older than Elara, with sharp features and intelligent eyes that missed little. Her gown was of fine wool dyed a deep forest green, and her hair was arranged in an elaborate braid that spoke of wealth and status. After a moment's hesitation, Elara gathered her courage and approached the woman's table. "Forgive my intrusion," Elara said politely, "but I could not help but notice that you appear to be a woman of business. I am new to Ravens Hollow and seeking employment. Might you know of anyone in need of a scribe or tutor?" The woman looked up from her ledger, her gaze sharp and assessing as she took in Elara's appearance. For a long moment she said nothing, and Elara felt a flush of embarrassment creeping up her neck. Perhaps she had been too forward, too presumptuous. But then the woman smiled, a small curve of her lips that did not quite reach her eyes. "Sit," she said, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. "I am Beatrice Harrow, and I own several businesses in this town, including a textile workshop and a small shipping enterprise. You say you can read and write?" Elara sat, relieved to have engaged the woman's interest. "Yes, my lady. I was educated in my youth and have experience managing household accounts. I am diligent and learn quickly." Beatrice studied her for another moment, her fingers drumming thoughtfully against the tabletop. "You speak and carry yourself like a woman of noble birth, yet you come to me seeking employment like a commoner. What is your story, girl? And do not insult my intelligence with lies. I can spot deception from a league away." Elara hesitated, weighing her options. She could craft a careful fiction, but something in Beatrice's direct manner made her believe that honesty might serve her better. Taking a deep breath, she met the older woman's gaze and spoke quietly. "I was married to a lord, but the marriage has been annulled because I bore him no children. I have no family to return to, no dowry to offer a new husband, and no prospects beyond what I can create for myself. I do not seek pity, only an opportunity to prove my worth through honest work." Beatrice's expression softened slightly, though her eyes remained sharp. A difficult position indeed. The world is not kind to women who find themselves outside the protection of family or husband. But you have courage to speak so plainly, and that is worth something. As it happens, I do have need of someone with your skills. My current scribe is old and his eyesight is failing. I need someone who can manage correspondence with my trading partners, keep accurate records of shipments and payments, and occasionally assist with negotiations when I am otherwise engaged. The work is demanding, but the pay is fair, and you would have a room above the workshop. Hope surged in Elara's chest, so powerful it nearly took her breath away. "I would be honored to accept such a position, Mistress Harrow. You will not regret placing your trust in me." Beatrice nodded, closing her ledger with a decisive snap. "We shall see. Come to the workshop tomorrow morning, an hour past dawn. It is the large building with blue shutters on Weaver's Lane, just off the main square. I will introduce you to the staff and show you your duties. If you prove competent, the position is yours. If not, we part ways with no hard feelings. Is that acceptable?" "More than acceptable," Elara replied, feeling as though a tremendous weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "Thank you, Mistress Harrow. I will not disappoint you." They spoke for a few more minutes, discussing practical matters, such as wages and expectations, before Beatrice excused herself and departed, leaving Elara alone with her thoughts. As she climbed the stairs to her room that night, Elara felt a cautious optimism beginning to take root. Perhaps this was the beginning of her new life, a chance to prove that her worth extended beyond her ability to bear children. She would work hard, learn everything she could, and build something for herself in this town. The next morning, Elara arrived at the workshop promptly, dressed in her most practical gown and with her hair neatly braided. The building was indeed impressive, a 3-story structure with large windows that allowed natural light to flood the workrooms within. Inside, dozens of women sat at looms and spinning wheels, their hands moving with practiced efficiency as they transformed raw wool into cloth. The air was filled with the rhythmic clacking of the looms and the soft murmur of conversation. Beatrice met her at the entrance and led her through the workshop, pointing out the various stations and explaining the process by which raw materials were transformed into finished goods. Elara listened intently, committing everything to memory. They climbed the stairs to the second floor, where a small office overlooked the main workroom. Here Beatrice introduced her to the elderly scribe, a stooped man named Peter who squinted at her through watery eyes. "Peter will teach you our system for the next few days," Beatrice explained. "After that, you will take over his duties entirely. He will remain on hand for consultation if needed, but the daily work will fall to you." "The records must be kept meticulously, as any errors could cost us dearly in disputes with merchants or tax collectors. Do you understand?" "Perfectly, Mistress Harrow," Elara replied. "I will give this my utmost attention." True to her word, Elara threw herself into the work with fierce determination. She spent long hours bent over ledgers, learning the workshop's system of notation and familiarizing herself with the names and details of Beatrice's various business partners. Peter, despite his failing eyesight, proved to be a patient teacher, and Elara found that she had a natural aptitude for the work. The precision and order of it appealed to her, and she took satisfaction in seeing the neat columns of numbers and carefully recorded transactions. Within a week, she had mastered the basics, and Peter began to step back, allowing her to handle more and more of the daily correspondence and record-keeping. Beatrice observed her progress with approval, occasionally offering guidance or correction, but generally leaving Elara to manage her responsibilities independently. The other workers in the textile shop accepted her presence with varying degrees of curiosity and friendliness, though some remained wary of this newcomer who spoke and carried herself so differently from themselves. As the weeks passed, Elara began to feel a sense of stability that she had not known since leaving Thornmere. She had a purpose, a routine, and the respect of her employer. The small room above the workshop became her sanctuary, a place where she could retreat at the end of each day and reflect on how far she had come. Yet even as she built this new life, there were moments when the pain of her past crept back in, when she would lie awake at night remembering the cold dismissal in Thomas's eyes or the whispered insults of the servants at Thornmere. One particularly cold evening, as snow fell heavily outside and the wind howled through the streets of Raven's Hollow, Beatrice invited Elara to join her for supper in her private quarters above the workshop. The rooms were elegantly furnished, with thick carpets and tapestries that kept out the worst of the chill. They sat before a roaring fire, eating roasted chicken and winter vegetables while the storm raged beyond the windows. "You have done well, Elara," Beatrice said, raising her cup in a small salute. "Better than I expected, if I am being honest. You have a sharp mind and a steady hand, qualities that are rare and valuable. I am pleased to have you in my service." Elara felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. "Thank you, Mistress Harrow. Your faith in me has meant more than I can express. This opportunity has given me a chance to prove that I am more than the failures others have attributed to me." Beatrice nodded, her expression thoughtful. "The world judges women harshly, especially those who do not conform to its narrow expectations. But you are learning what I learned long ago, that a woman with intelligence and determination can carve out her own path, regardless of what society decrees. Never forget that, Elara. Your worth is not determined by any man, noble or otherwise." They talked late into the night, and Elara felt a bond forming between them, a mutual respect and understanding that transcended the simple relationship of employer and employee. Beatrice shared stories of her own struggles, how she had built her business from nothing after the death of her husband, facing scorn and obstacles at every turn, but refusing to be defeated. Her words resonated deeply with Elara, reinforcing the resolve that had brought her this far. Yet even as Elara found comfort in her new life, rumors began to circulate through Raven's Hollow that would soon draw her into circumstances far beyond anything she could have anticipated. Travelers passing through the town spoke of unrest in the northern territories, of disputes between rival lords that threatened to spill over into open conflict. More intriguingly, there were whispers of a mysterious figure known only as the Prince of Shadows, a man who commanded the loyalty of soldiers and spies alike, but who remained hidden from public view, operating from strongholds deep in the wild borderlands. The rumors of the Prince of Shadows grew more frequent and more detailed as winter deepened its grip on the land. Elara heard the stories from merchants who came to the workshop to negotiate orders, from travelers who stopped at the Silver Stag for warmth and ale, and from the workers in Beatrice's employ who gossiped during their brief respites from the looms. Some claimed the Prince of Shadows was a bastard son of the old king. Others insisted he was a foreign nobleman who had been exiled for crimes unknown. A few whispered that he was a ghost, a specter of vengeance haunting the northern reaches where he commanded an army of outcasts and mercenaries. What everyone agreed upon was that he was dangerous, cunning, and utterly ruthless when it came to protecting his territory and his people. He had carved out a domain in the borderlands between the kingdoms, a wild and lawless region where the authority of the crown held little sway. Those who pledged loyalty to him found protection and prosperity, while those who opposed him met swift and merciless ends. Yet despite his fearsome reputation, there were also tales of his unexpected mercy, of villages saved from bandits, of travelers rescued from wolves and worse dangers that lurked in the deep forests. Elara found herself strangely fascinated by these stories, though she told herself it was merely idle curiosity. Her life in Raven's Hollow had settled into a comfortable rhythm, and she had no desire to involve herself in the dangerous politics of warring nobles. She focused on her work, managing the workshop's correspondence and accounts with increasing confidence and skill. Beatrice had come to rely on her completely, often consulting her on matters of business strategy, and even seeking her opinion on potential investments. It was on a gray morning in late winter, when the snow had begun to melt and the first hints of spring were touching the air, that everything changed. Elara was in the office, reviewing a shipment manifest, when she heard raised voices from the street below. She moved to the window and looked down to see a group of armed men on horseback entering the town square. They were not the usual town guards or merchant escorts. These men wore armor of blackened steel and leather, their cloaks dark as midnight, and they moved with the disciplined precision of trained soldiers. At their head rode a figure who immediately commanded attention. He was tall and powerfully built, his shoulders broad beneath a cloak lined with black fur. His hair was dark as a raven's wing, falling to his shoulders in waves that caught the dim morning light. Even from this distance, Elara could see the sharp angles of his face, the strong jaw and high cheekbones that gave him an almost predatory beauty. He wore no crown or circlet, but there was something in the way he carried himself, the absolute confidence and authority in every movement, that spoke of nobility and command. The townspeople stopped in their tracks, staring at the newcomers with a mixture of fear and fascination. Elara felt her heart begin to race, though she could not have said why. There was something about this man, something that drew the eye and held it captive. She watched as he dismounted with fluid grace and spoke quietly to one of his men, gesturing toward the keep where Baron Blackwood maintained his residence. Beatrice appeared at Elara's shoulder, having heard the commotion from below. She looked out the window, and Elara heard her sharp intake of breath. "The Prince of Shadows," Beatrice murmured, her voice tight with tension. "I had heard he might be coming to Ravenshollow, but I did not truly believe it. This does not bode well. When men like him arrive in a town, trouble invariably follows." Elara could not tear her eyes away from the figure in the square. Why would he come here? Ravenshollow is far from the borderlands, and Baron Blackwood has always maintained careful neutrality in the conflicts of the north. Beatrice shook her head slowly. "I do not know, but we would be wise to stay out of whatever business brings him to our town. Men of his ilk are storms, Elara, beautiful and terrible and utterly destructive to those caught in their path. Come away from the window and return to your work. We have orders to fill and accounts to balance, and that is where our attention should remain." Though Beatrice's words were sensible, Elara found it difficult to focus on her ledgers for the rest of the day. Her mind kept returning to the image of the dark-haired warrior in the square, to the way he had moved with such coiled power and grace. She scolded herself for such foolish distraction. What did it matter to her who this Prince of Shadows was, or what business brought him to Ravenshollow? She had her own concerns, her own carefully rebuilt life to maintain. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. 2 days after the Prince of Shadows arrived in Ravenshollow, Elara was sent by Beatrice to deliver a message to one of their suppliers, a wool merchant whose shop was located near the town's eastern gate. It was a simple errand, one she had performed many times before, and she thought nothing of it as she made her way through the narrow streets with the sealed letter tucked safely in her satchel. The day was overcast but mild, and there was a freshness in the air that spoke of winter's ending. She was returning to the workshop, her errand complete, when she heard the sound of angry voices coming from a side street. Elara paused, debating whether to continue on her way or investigate. Her curiosity won out, and she turned down the alley to see what was causing the disturbance. What she found made her blood run cold. 3 men had cornered a young girl against the wall of a building. The girl could not have been more than 14 or 15 years old, her face pale with terror as the men leered at her and made crude remarks. They wore the rough clothing of common laborers, and from the smell that reached Elara even at this distance, they had been drinking heavily. One of them reached out to grab the girl's arm, and she cried out in fear. Without thinking, Elara stepped forward, her voice sharp and commanding. "Leave her alone. What manner of cowards are you, to threaten a child?" The men turned, surprise registering on their faces before it was replaced by ugly sneers. The largest of them, a brute with a scarred face and missing teeth, took a step toward Elara. "This is none of your concern, woman. Go about your business before you find yourself in worse trouble than this little wench." Elara's heart was pounding, but she refused to back down. "I said leave her alone. There are guards in this town, and I will summon them if you do not disperse immediately." The men laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the stone walls. The scarred man moved closer, and Elara could smell the sour reek of ale on his breath. "Summon the guards, will you? By the time they arrive, we'll be long gone, and you'll be in no condition to tell them anything. Perhaps we'll have ourselves a bit of fun with 2 instead of 1. Terror lanced through Elara, but before the man could reach her, a voice cut through the air like a blade, cold and utterly devoid of mercy. "Touch either of them, and you will lose your hand before you can draw another breath." Everyone froze. Elara turned to see the Prince of Shadows standing at the entrance to the alley, his hand resting casually on the pommel of the sword at his hip. He was even more imposing up close, his height and breadth making him seem to fill the narrow space. His eyes were a startling shade of gray, like storm clouds before lightning strikes, and they were fixed on the 3 men with an intensity that promised violence. The scarred man's bravado evaporated like morning mist. He and his companions backed away, their hands raised in placating gestures. "We meant no harm, my lord," one of them stammered. "Just having a bit of sport, nothing more." The Prince of Shadows took a single step forward, and the temperature in the alley seemed to drop. "I do not care what you meant. You will leave this place now, and if I hear of you troubling anyone in this town again, I will hunt you down personally and ensure that you regret the day you were born. Do you understand me?" The men nodded frantically and fled, nearly tripping over each other in their haste to escape. The young girl slumped against the wall, sobbing with relief. Elara hurried to her side, wrapping an arm around her shoulders and murmuring soothing words. When she looked up, she found the Prince of Shadows watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "Thank you," Elara said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Your intervention was most timely. I fear my bold words were about to earn me more trouble than I could handle." He inclined his head slightly, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Brave, but foolish, to confront 3 armed men alone, though I admire your courage in defending one who could not defend herself. Few would have done the same." Elara felt warmth creep into her cheeks at his words. "I could not simply walk away and leave her to their mercy. What kind of person would that make me?" "A sensible one, perhaps," he replied, and this time the smile was more pronounced. "But sensibility is often overrated. I am Demon Thornheart, though I suspect you already know that." So he was aware of the rumors, the whispers that followed him wherever he went. Elara straightened, maintaining her composure despite the way her pulse had quickened. "I am Elara Whitmore, currently in the employ of Mistress Beatrice Harrow. And yes, I have heard the stories, though I try not to place too much faith in gossip." Demon Thornheart studied her with those piercing gray eyes, and Elara had the unsettling sensation that he could see right through her carefully maintained facade to the wounds and fears she kept hidden beneath. "Whitmore," he repeated thoughtfully. "Of the Northern Whitmores? I know of Lord Thomas and his family. You were his wife, were you not?" Elara's breath caught. She had not expected her past to follow her here, had hoped that in Raven's Hollow she could simply be Elara, the scribe, and nothing more. But of course a man like Demon Thornheart would have access to information that others did not. She lifted her chin, refusing to show shame or embarrassment. "I was, briefly. That marriage has been dissolved, and I have made a new life for myself here. My past is my own concern." Something shifted in his expression, a softening that made him seem less the fearsome warrior and more simply a man. "I meant no offense. In truth, I have little love for the Whitmores. Thomas is a pompous fool who values appearances over substance. If he was foolish enough to cast you aside, then the loss was entirely his." The unexpected kindness in his words caught Elara off guard, and she found herself blinking back sudden tears. Before she could respond, the young girl tugged at her sleeve, her voice small and frightened. "Please, my lady, I need to get home. My mother will be worried." Elara nodded, pushing aside her own tumultuous emotions to focus on the immediate need. "Of course. Let me walk with you to ensure you arrive safely." Demon stepped aside to let them pass, but as Elara moved toward the mouth of the alley, he spoke again. "Lady Elara, if I may, I would like to speak with you further. There are matters I believe we should discuss. Would you be willing to meet me at the Silver Stag this evening? I give you my word that you will be safe and that the conversation will be to your benefit." Elara hesitated, every instinct of caution screaming at her to refuse. But there was something in his gaze, a sincerity that seemed at odds with his fearsome reputation, that made her pause. And beneath that, if she was honest with herself, There was curiosity, a desire to know more about this enigmatic man who had appeared like a dark angel to rescue her from danger. "Very well," she said at last. "I will meet you there at sunset, but I will hold you to your word regarding my safety, Lord Thornhart." "You have it," he replied, and there was a warmth in his voice that sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. "Until this evening, Lady Elara." The hours between her encounter with Demon Thornhart and the appointed meeting seemed to crawl by with agonizing slowness. Elara returned to the workshop with the young girl, ensuring she was safely delivered to her grateful mother before ascending to the office where her ledgers awaited. But concentration eluded her completely. She found herself staring at the same column of figures for minutes at a time, her mind replaying every moment of the confrontation in the alley, every word Demon had spoken, every subtle shift in his expression. Beatrice noticed her distraction almost immediately. The older woman set down the bolt of cloth she had been examining and fixed Elara with a penetrating stare that made her feel like a child caught in mischief. "Something is troubling you," Beatrice observed, her tone leaving no room for denial. "You have been staring at that same page for the better part of an hour, and I doubt very much that the numbers have suddenly become so fascinating as to warrant such intense scrutiny. What happened during your errand?" Elara hesitated, then decided that honesty was the wisest course. Beatrice had been nothing but kind and fair to her, and she deserved the truth. Taking a deep breath, she recounted the incident in the alley, describing how she had intervened to protect the young girl, and how Demon Thornhart had appeared to drive off the would-be attackers. She finished by mentioning the invitation to meet him that evening, watching Beatrice's face carefully for her reaction. The older woman's expression grew increasingly grave as the story unfolded. When Elara finished, Beatrice was silent for a long moment, her fingers drumming against the wooden desk in a rhythm that betrayed her agitation. "You put yourself in considerable danger today," Beatrice said finally, her voice tight with concern. "Those men could have hurt you badly, or worse. I appreciate your courage and your compassion, but you must be more careful, Elara. The world is not kind to women who stand alone against violent men." "I know," Elara replied softly, "but I could not simply walk away, and Lord Thornhart did intervene before any real harm could come to me." Beatrice's expression grew even more troubled. "Yes, and that brings us to the matter of this evening's meeting. Elara, I must counsel you to be extremely cautious where the Prince of Shadows is concerned. He is not a man to be trifled with, and his interest in you, whatever its source, could bring complications you are not prepared to handle. Men of his power and position do not extend invitations without purpose, and that purpose is rarely in the best interest of women like us." Elara felt a flash of defensiveness, though she could not have said exactly why. "He gave me his word that I would be safe, and he seemed genuinely sincere. Perhaps he simply wishes to discuss what occurred today, or to ensure that the girl will be protected from further harassment." Beatrice shook her head, her eyes sad. "Oh, my dear girl, you are intelligent and capable in so many ways, but you are still naive about certain aspects of the world. Men like Demon Thornhart do not concern themselves with the welfare of common folk unless it serves some greater purpose. I do not say this to frighten you, only to prepare you. If you are determined to meet with him, and I can see that you are, then go with your eyes open and your wits sharp. Do not allow yourself to be swayed by a handsome face or pretty words. Remember what you have already survived, and do not place yourself in a position to be hurt again." The words struck deep, resonating with Elara's own fears and uncertainties. She had been cast aside once already, deemed worthless by a man who should have cherished her. The last thing she needed was to allow herself to be drawn into a situation that could lead to even greater pain. Yet despite Beatrice's warnings, despite her own better judgment, she could not shake the desire to keep that appointment, to learn what Demon Thornhart wanted from her. "I will be careful," she promised, "and I will not forget the lessons I have learned. Thank you, Beatrice, for your concern and your wisdom. I do not take either lightly." Beatrice reached across the desk and squeezed Elara's hand gently. "I know you will do what you think best, and I trust your judgment more than you might believe. Simply remember that you have built something good here, something solid and real. Do not throw it away for the fleeting promise of something that may prove to be nothing more than smoke and shadow." As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and crimson, Elara prepared for the meeting with more care than she had given to her appearance in weeks. She selected a gown of deep blue wool, its bodice fitted with black leather lacing and its sleeves trimmed with soft gray fur. Over this, she wore a cloak of charcoal wool lined with rabbit fur, fastened at the throat with a simple silver clasp. She brushed her auburn hair until it gleamed like burnished copper in the fading light, then braided it in a single plait that hung down her back. Looking at her reflection in the small mirror above her washstand, she was surprised by what she saw. The haunted, defeated woman who had fled Thornmere seemed a distant memory. In her place stood someone stronger, more self-assured, though the shadows of past pain still lingered in her emerald eyes. The Silver Stag was already filling with the evening crowd when Elara arrived, farmers and merchants and travelers seeking warmth and sustenance after a long day's labor. She paused just inside the door, scanning the common room for any sign of Demon Thornheart. At first she did not see him, and a strange mixture of relief and disappointment washed over her. But then a figure rose from a table in the far corner, partially hidden in shadow, and she recognized the tall, powerful form of the Prince of Shadows. He had changed from the armor he had worn that morning, now dressed in a tunic of black leather over a shirt of fine linen the color of storm clouds. A heavy cloak of dark wool hung from his shoulders, and at his hip she could see the glint of a sword pommel. But what struck her most was his face, now that she could see it clearly in the firelight. He was younger than she had initially thought, perhaps only 30 years of age, with features that were almost cruelly beautiful. The sharp angles of his cheekbones and jaw were softened slightly by the fullness of his mouth, and those gray eyes that had seemed so cold and merciless that morning now held a warmth that made her pulse quicken. He gestured to the empty chair across from him, and Elara made her way through the crowded room, acutely aware of the curious glances being directed her way. She settled into the chair with as much grace as she could muster, folding her hands in her lap to keep them from trembling. "Thank you for coming," Demon said, his voice low and rich. "I was not certain you would. My reputation tends to precede me, and not always in ways that inspire trust." Elara met his gaze steadily. "I gave you my word, Lord Thornheart, just as you gave me yours. I may have little left in this world, but my honor remains intact." A smile touched his lips, transforming his face into something even more striking. "Please call me Demon. Titles and formalities seem unnecessary between us, given the circumstances of our meeting, and I would ask your permission to address you as Elara, if that would not be too presumptuous." "You may," she replied, surprised by how much she wanted to hear her name spoken in that deep, resonant voice. "Though I confess I'm still uncertain as to why you wish to speak with me. Surely a man of your position has more pressing concerns than a chance encounter in an alley." Demon leaned back in his chair, studying her with an intensity that made her feel both exposed and strangely seen. "You intrigue me, Elara. It is rare to encounter someone who acts from genuine compassion rather than calculated self-interest. You risked yourself for a girl you did not know, expecting nothing in return. That speaks to a quality of character that I have found all too uncommon in the circles I frequent." Elara felt warmth creep into her cheeks at the praise, but she kept her voice steady. "I did only what any decent person would do. There is nothing remarkable in refusing to stand by while someone helpless is threatened. And there is the heart of why you fascinate me," Demon said, leaning forward slightly. "You truly believe that, do not you? You see your actions as ordinary, when in truth they are anything but." Most people, Elara, would have hurried past that alley without a second thought, telling themselves it was not their concern. But you did not. You stepped forward knowing you might be hurt because it was the right thing to do. That is courage of the truest kind. His words stirred something deep within her, a longing she had not allowed herself to acknowledge. To be seen, truly seen, for who she was rather than what she had failed to be, was a gift she had not expected. But Beatrice's warnings echoed in her mind, and she forced herself to maintain her composure. "You flatter me, Demon, but I suspect there is more to this conversation than compliments on my character. What is it you truly want from me?" He did not look offended by her directness. Instead, his expression grew more serious, and he gestured to the serving girl to bring them wine before continuing. When 2 cups had been placed before them and the girl had withdrawn, he spoke again. "I will be honest with you, as you have been with me. I came to Raven's Hollow on business with Baron Blackwood, matters of territory and trade agreements that need not concern you. But what I found here was unexpected. You see, Elara, I have spent years building my domain in the borderlands, creating a place where those who have been cast out or rejected by so-called civilized society can find refuge and purpose. I have warriors, yes, but I also have farmers, craftsmen, healers, and scholars. What I lack, however, is someone who understands the intricacies of noble society, someone who can help me navigate the political waters that I must now swim in if I am to protect my people from the ambitions of those who would see us destroyed. Elara's breath caught. You are offering me a position in your household? More than that, Demon said, his eyes never leaving hers. I am offering you a place where your intelligence and capabilities would be valued, where you would be more than a scribe managing accounts for a textile merchant. No offense intended to Mistress Harrow, who I am sure is a fine woman, but your talents are wasted here. You could be so much more, achieve so much more, if you were given the opportunity. The offer was tempting, far more tempting than Elara wanted to admit, but doubt and caution held her back. Why me? You know nothing about me beyond what you witnessed today. How can you be certain I possess the qualities you seek? Demon took a sip of his wine, his expression thoughtful. I make it my business to know things, Elara. When I learned you were in Ravenshollow, I made inquiries. I know that you were cast aside by Thomas Whitmore because you could not give him an heir, despite the fact that the fault may well have lain with him rather than you. I know that you came here with nothing and built a new life through determination and hard work. I know that Beatrice Harrow speaks highly of your intelligence and integrity, and after today, I know that you possess courage and compassion in equal measure. These are the qualities I value, the qualities I need in those who serve me. Elara was silent for a long moment, her mind racing. Everything he said was true, and the prospect of leaving behind the limited life she had built in Ravenshollow for something grander, something with real purpose and meaning, was powerfully appealing. But there were risks, enormous risks, in aligning herself with a man as controversial and dangerous as Demon Thornheart. I need time to consider this, she said finally. It is not a decision to be made lightly, and I would need to speak with Beatrice to ensure that my departure would not leave her in difficulty. Demon nodded, as if he had expected this response. Of course. Take the time you need. I will be in Ravenshollow for another 3 days, concluding my business with the Barren. If you decide to accept my offer, come to the keep and ask for me. If you decide against it, I will respect your choice and trouble you no further. But know this, Elara. I believe you are destined for far greater things than managing ledgers in a provincial town. You have the strength and spirit to shape the world around you, if only you dare to reach for it. Elara left the Silver Stag with her mind in turmoil, Demon's words echoing in her thoughts like the persistent tolling of a bell. The night air was cold against her flushed cheeks as she made her way back through the darkening streets of Ravenshollow, pulling her cloak tighter around her shoulders. Above, stars were beginning to appear in the deepening blue of the sky, tiny points of light that seemed to mock her confusion with their steady, unchanging brilliance. Everything in her life had been uncertain since the day she left Thornmere, and now she was being offered a path that could lead to either redemption or ruin. She climbed the stairs to her small room above the workshop, her footsteps heavy with the weight of the decision before her. Once inside, she lit a candle and sat on the edge of her narrow bed, staring at the flickering flame as if it might offer some clarity. Part of her wanted desperately to accept Demon's offer, to seize this opportunity to become something more than a discarded wife who had found safe but limited employment. But another part, the part that had been wounded and betrayed, whispered caution and warned her against trusting too easily in the promises of powerful men. Sleep eluded her that night. She tossed and turned beneath her woolen blanket, her mind playing out countless scenarios. What would life be like in Demon's domain? Would she truly be valued and respected, or would she find herself in an even more precarious position than before? And beneath all these practical concerns ran a current of something else, something she was reluctant to name. When Demon had looked at her across that table, when his gray eyes had held hers with such intensity, she had felt something stir within her that she had thought long dead. It was dangerous. This attraction she felt, dangerous and foolish. She had learned the hard way that desire and affection were poor foundations on which to build a future. Morning came gray and overcast, with a light drizzle that turned the streets to mud. Elara rose early, her eyes gritty from lack of sleep, and dressed with mechanical efficiency. She descended to the workshop to find Beatrice already there, reviewing inventory with one of the senior weavers. When the other woman departed, Beatrice turned to Elara with a knowing expression. "You did not sleep well," she observed. "I can see it in your face. The meeting with Lord Thornhart did not go as you expected, did it?" Elara sank into the chair across from Beatrice's desk, suddenly desperate to unburden herself. "He offered me a position in his household, serving as an advisor on matters of politics and noble society. He says my talents are wasted here, that I could achieve far more under his patronage. And I find myself torn, Beatrice. Part of me wants to accept, to take this chance to be something more than I am now. But I am afraid. Afraid of making another mistake, of trusting unwisely and ending up worse off than before." Beatrice was quiet for a long moment, her intelligent eyes studying Elara's face with the careful attention she usually reserved for examining the quality of cloth. When she finally spoke, her voice was gentle but firm. "I will not lie to you, Elara. There is risk in what he offers, considerable risk. Demon Thornhart is a controversial figure, and those who align themselves with him may find themselves caught in dangerous currents. But I also cannot deny that he speaks the truth about your potential. You are intelligent, capable, and wasted in the limited role you occupy here. I have known this from the beginning, but I also knew you needed time to heal, to rebuild your confidence after what you suffered at Thornmere. Perhaps that time has come to an end." Elara felt tears prick at her eyes. "You have been so good to me, Beatrice. The thought of leaving you, of abandoning the security you have provided, feels like a betrayal of your kindness." Beatrice reached across the desk and took Elara's hands in her own, her grip warm and strong. "Listen to me carefully, child. You owe me nothing beyond the honest work you have already given. I took you on because I saw your potential, and because I know what it is to be a woman alone in this world, fighting for every scrap of dignity and respect. But I did not save you from one cage only to become another gentler prison. If Demon Thornhart offers you a chance to spread your wings, to truly test the limits of what you can achieve, then you should take it. Yes, there are risks, but there are risks in staying as well. The risk of never knowing what you might have become, of spending the rest of your life wondering what if." The tears Elara had been holding back began to fall, and she made no effort to stop them. "I am so afraid of being hurt again, of being found wanting and cast aside. I do not think I could survive it a second time." "Oh, my dear," Beatrice said softly, moving around the desk to embrace Elara. "You have already proven that you can survive far more than you ever imagined. You left Thornmere with nothing and built a new life here through sheer determination and courage. That strength does not disappear simply because you choose a different path. Whatever happens, you will endure, because that is who you are at your core. And I will tell you something else. I have lived long enough to recognize when two people are drawn to each other, when there is a connection that goes beyond mere attraction. I saw the way you spoke of Lord Thornhart, the light in your eyes when you described your conversation. Do not dismiss that so easily, Elara. Love, real love, is rare and precious, and if there is even a chance of finding it, you owe it to yourself to pursue it." Elara pulled back, wiping at her tears with the back of her hand. "Love? Beatrice, I barely know the man. How can you speak of love when we have met only twice?" Beatrice smiled, a sad, knowing expression. "Sometimes, my dear, the heart recognizes what the mind has not yet accepted. I am not saying you love him now, only that the possibility exists, and that you should not let fear prevent you from exploring it. Life is too short and too cruel to turn away from chances at happiness when they present themselves." For the rest of that day and into the next, Elara wrestled with her decision. She threw herself into her work with renewed focus, as if the familiar routines of ledgers and correspondence could quiet the storm in her heart. But no matter how hard she tried to distract herself, Demon's words kept returning to her, along with the memory of how she had felt when he looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not a failure but a woman of worth and potential. On the second evening after their meeting, as the sun was setting and painting the workshop in shades of gold and amber, Elara made her decision. She would accept Demon's offer. The thought terrified her, filled her with a fear so profound it made her hands shake. But beneath the fear was something else. Hope. The fragile, tentative hope that perhaps her life could be more than she had dared to dream, that she could find not just survival, but purpose and maybe, just maybe, something more. She told Beatrice of her decision that night, and the older woman embraced her with fierce warmth. "You are making the right choice," Beatrice assured her. "And know that if things do not work out as you hope, You will always have a place here. This is not goodbye forever, merely farewell for now." The next morning, Elara dressed with care in her finest gown, a dress of deep green wool with black leather accents and sleeves lined with soft fur. She braided her hair in an intricate pattern that Margaret had taught her years ago and fastened her cloak with the silver clasp that had been a gift from her mother. Looking at her reflection, she barely recognized the woman staring back at her. She looked strong, determined, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The walk to Barren Blackwood's keep seemed both endless and far too short. The structure rose on a small hill at the edge of town, a modest fortress of gray stone surrounded by a wooden palisade. Guards stood at the gate, but when Elara gave her name and stated her business, they let her pass without question. Apparently, Demon had left word that she might come. Inside the keep's courtyard, she found a scene of controlled activity. Demon's men were preparing for departure, checking saddles and weapons while servants loaded supplies onto pack horses. In the midst of it all stood Demon himself, dressed in traveling clothes of black leather and wool, his dark hair tied back from his face. When he saw her approaching, his expression transformed, a smile breaking across his features that made him look younger and far less intimidating. "Elara," he said, striding forward to meet her. "I had hoped you would come, but I confess I was not certain you would find the courage to take this leap." She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze directly. "I have decided to accept your offer, Demon. But I want to be clear about my expectations. I will not be a decoration or a plaything. If you want my counsel and my skills, you will respect my intelligence and listen to what I have to say, even when my words are not what you wish to hear. I have been undervalued once before, and I will not allow it to happen again." Demon's smile widened, and there was genuine admiration in his eyes. "I would expect nothing less, and I promise you will have my respect and my ear whenever you need them. You will be more than an advisor, Elara. You will be a partner in the work we are building, and your voice will carry weight in all decisions that affect our people." He extended his hand to her, and after only a moment's hesitation, she placed her hand in his. His grip was warm and strong, and she felt a current pass between them at the touch, something electric and undeniable. Whatever lay ahead, whatever challenges and dangers awaited in the borderlands, she knew with sudden certainty that this was where she was meant to be. "We leave within the hour," Demon said. "Do you have possessions that need to be collected?" Elara shook her head. "Beatrice is having my things sent ahead. I travel light these days, having learned that what truly matters cannot be carried in a satchel." "Wise words," Demon replied. "Then come, let me introduce you to some of my people. They will be curious about the woman who has agreed to join our cause, and it is best they meet you before we begin the journey north." He led her across the courtyard to where a group of his warriors stood preparing their horses. They were a diverse group, men and women of varying ages and backgrounds, but all shared a certain hardness in their eyes that spoke of difficult lives and harder choices. Yet when Demon introduced Elara, explaining that she would be serving as his advisor on matters of politics and diplomacy, they greeted her with respect and welcome that surprised her. A tall woman with silver-streaked hair and a scar across her left cheek stepped forward, extending her arm in the warrior's greeting. "I am Captain Meredith, commander of Lord Thornheart's Guard. Welcome to our company, Lady Elara. Any woman brave enough to stand up to 3 armed men in defense of a child is someone I am honored to ride beside." Elara clasped the woman's arm, feeling the strength in her grip. "Please, just Elara. I am no longer a lady of any house, merely a woman trying to find her place in this world." Meredith's expression softened slightly. "Titles matter less than character in our ranks, Elara. You will find that we judge people by their actions, not their birth. If you prove yourself worthy, you will earn our loyalty. If not, no amount of noble blood will save you from our scorn." "That seems more than fair," Elara replied, appreciating the woman's directness. Over the next hour, she met more of Demon's inner circle. There was Marcus, a grizzled veteran who served as Demon's second-in-command, his face a map of old battles, but his eyes sharp and intelligent. There was young Simon, barely 20 but already renowned as a scout and tracker, his movements quick and graceful as a deer. And there was Father Benedict, an elderly priest who had left his monastery to minister to the outcasts and refugees who populated Demon's domain, his gentle demeanor hiding a spine of steel. The journey north from Raven's Hollow began under overcast skies that threatened rain but never quite delivered. Elara rode beside Demon at the head of the column, mounted on a gray mare that had been selected specifically for her, gentle-tempered but sturdy enough for the long trek ahead. The landscape gradually transformed as they traveled, the gentle hills and cultivated fields giving way to wilder terrain, forests of pine and oak that grew thick and tangled, broken only by rushing streams swollen with snowmelt from the distant mountains. Demon proved to be an excellent traveling companion, neither hovering over her with unnecessary concern nor ignoring her presence. He pointed out landmarks along the route, sharing stories of the region's history and the various clans and families who had inhabited these lands for generations. Elara found herself relaxing in his company, the initial awkwardness fading as they fell into easy conversation. He asked her questions about her life before Thornmere, about her childhood and her education, and he listened with genuine interest to her answers, occasionally offering observations that revealed the depth of his own intelligence and learning. "You are not what I expected," Elara admitted on the second day of travel as they paused to water the horses at a clear stream. "The stories paint you as a ruthless warrior, caring for nothing beyond power and conquest. But you speak like a scholar, and you treat your people with kindness and respect. Which is the real Demon Thornheart?" He smiled, a wry expression that suggested he had heard similar questions before. "Perhaps both are real, or perhaps neither. The truth is that I am whoever I need to be to protect those under my care. When I face enemies who would destroy everything we have built, I am ruthless and merciless, because anything less would be a betrayal of my people's trust. But among those I consider friends and allies, I can afford to be myself, to show the parts of my nature that do not serve me on the battlefield. Does that answer trouble you?" Elara considered this as she knelt beside the stream, cupping water in her hands to drink. "No," she said finally. "I think it shows wisdom, actually. We all wear different faces for different circumstances. The woman I was at Thornmere was not the same as the woman I became in Ravenshollow, and neither is quite the same as who I am becoming now. Perhaps we are all many people, and the key is knowing when to let each version of ourselves emerge." "Well said," Demon replied, his gray eyes warm with approval. "You have a philosopher's mind, Elara. I knew I was right to bring you into my service." As they continued north, the weather grew colder and the terrain more challenging. They passed through villages where Demon was greeted with a mixture of respect and affection that surprised Elara. Children ran out to see the column pass, and their parents offered food and shelter without being asked. In one small hamlet, an elderly woman pressed a loaf of fresh bread into Demon's hands with tears in her eyes, thanking him for driving off the bandits who had terrorized her community the previous summer. He accepted the gift with grace, speaking to her gently and asking after her family's welfare as if she were a beloved aunt rather than a simple peasant. "They love you," Elara observed that evening as they made camp in a clearing beside a waterfall. "Your people, they truly love you. I can see it in their faces, hear it in their voices. How did you earn such devotion?" Demon was quiet for a moment, staring into the flames of the campfire that crackled between them. Around them, his warriors were settling in for the night, their voices a low murmur of conversation punctuated by occasional laughter. Finally he spoke, his voice soft but carrying clearly in the still night air. "I gave them what no one else would: safety, purpose, a place where they could belong without shame or fear. Many of my people are outcasts from the so-called civilized lands, people who were rejected for reasons beyond their control, bastards who could not inherit, women who refused to submit to cruel husbands, men who spoke out against injustice and were punished for their honesty. I offered them all a home, asked only that they contribute to our community according to their abilities, and live by a simple code of mutual respect and protection. It is not a complicated formula, Elara, but it is one that few lords seem willing to embrace." His words resonated with Elara's own experiences, and she felt a tightness in her chest that might have been grief or gratitude or some combination of both. "Is that why you sought me out? Because you saw me as another outcast in need of refuge?" Demon looked up, meeting her gaze across the fire. The flames cast dancing shadows across his features, making him appear almost otherworldly in his beauty and intensity. "At first, perhaps, but not anymore. Now I see you as something far more valuable. A woman of intelligence and compassion who understands both the world of nobility and the struggles of those who exist outside its protections. You can bridge those worlds, Elara. Help me navigate the political complexities that threaten everything we have built. But more than that, you remind me that there is still goodness in this world, still people worth fighting for." The sincerity in his voice made Elara's heart race, and she looked away, suddenly unable to hold his gaze. She was not ready for the feelings he stirred in her, the hope and longing that threatened to overwhelm the careful defenses she had constructed around her wounded heart. To distract herself, she changed the subject, asking him about the specifics of the challenges he faced from neighboring lords who viewed his domain as a threat to their own authority. Demon accepted the deflection with good grace, and they spent the rest of the evening discussing strategy and politics. He explained that several powerful nobles, led by Duke Harrington of the Eastern Territories, had formed an alliance aimed at destroying Demon's realm and dividing his lands among themselves. They claimed to be acting in the king's interest, arguing that Demon's domain represented a lawless zone that harbored criminals and undermined royal authority. In truth, Demon suspected they were simply greedy and saw an opportunity to expand their own holdings. "The king himself is old and weak," Demon explained. "He has little interest in the affairs of the borderlands and even less power to enforce his will. His son, the crown prince, is a different matter. Prince Edward is ambitious and clever, and he sees the value in having a strong ally in the north who can help maintain stability without requiring constant royal oversight. I have been in negotiations with him, seeking formal recognition of my domain in exchange for pledges of loyalty and military support when needed. But the Duke and his allies are doing everything in their power to prevent that recognition, spreading lies and rumors designed to paint me as a threat rather than an asset. And that is where you believe I can help," Elara said thoughtfully. "You need someone who understands the language and customs of the court, who can help you craft messages and strategies that will appeal to Prince Edward while undermining the Duke's propaganda." "Exactly," Demon confirmed. "You were raised in that world, even if you were ultimately rejected by it. You know how nobles think, what appeals to their vanity and their fears. With your help, I believe we can craft a case that Prince Edward will find compelling, one that serves both his interests and ours." Over the following days, as they drew closer to Demon's stronghold, Elara began to understand the full scope of what she had agreed to undertake. This was not merely a matter of writing pretty letters and offering polite counsel. The stakes were enormous, involving the lives and futures of thousands of people who depended on Demon's protection. If she failed, if her advice proved poor or her strategies ineffective, the consequences would be catastrophic. The weight of that responsibility was crushing, and there were moments when she questioned whether she was truly capable of fulfilling the role Demon had envisioned for her. But whenever doubt threatened to overwhelm her, she would look at Demon and remember the faith he had placed in her abilities. He did not see her as a barren failure, as Thomas had, but as a woman of intelligence and worth. That belief, fragile as it was, became the foundation on which she built her courage. She would not let him down. She would not let herself down. On the 7th day of their journey, they crested a ridge, and Elara got her first glimpse of Shadowmere, Demon's fortress home. It was not the grim, forbidding structure she had half expected, but rather a sprawling complex of stone and timber buildings arranged around a central keep. The architecture was practical rather than ornamental, designed for defense and function, but there was a certain rugged beauty to it as well. Smoke rose from dozens of chimneys, and she could see people moving about the courtyards and training grounds, going about their daily tasks with purposeful energy. The valley in which Shadowmere sat was sheltered by mountains on 3 sides, with a river running through its center providing fresh water and a natural barrier against attack. Fields and pastures surrounded the fortress, evidence of a thriving agricultural community, and Elara could see livestock grazing peacefully in the late afternoon sun. It was, she realized with some surprise, a real home, not just a military outpost, but a living, breathing settlement where people built lives and raised families. As they descended into the valley, people began to emerge from buildings and fields to greet their lord's return. Children ran alongside the horses, laughing and calling out questions about the journey. Women waved from doorways and men paused in their work to raise hands in salute. Demon acknowledged them all with smiles and waves, clearly at ease among his people in a way that Thomas had never been at Thornmere. When they reached the main gate of the fortress, a young woman came running out, her face alight with joy. She was beautiful, with golden hair that fell in waves past her shoulders and eyes the color of summer sky. She wore a simple gown of blue wool, but she carried herself with the grace of someone accustomed to authority. When she reached Demon, he dismounted and caught her in a fierce embrace, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around as she laughed with delight. Elara felt a sudden, sharp pain in her chest, a jealousy so intense it took her breath away. She had no right to feel this way, no claim on Demon's affections, but the sight of him holding this beautiful woman so tenderly made something twist inside her. She looked away, focusing on dismounting from her own horse with as much dignity as she could muster, trying to ignore the hot sting of tears that threatened to form. "Elara," Demon called, his voice warm and happy. "Come, let me introduce you to someone very important. This is my sister, Lady Catherine Thornhart. Catherine, this is Lady Elara Whitmore, the advisor I told you about in my last message." Relief flooded through Elara so powerfully that she nearly stumbled. His sister, of course. The resemblance was clear now that she looked properly, the same sharp cheekbones and gray eyes, though Catherine's features were softer, more delicate. She managed a smile and moved forward to greet the younger woman, who released her brother and turned to Elara with open curiosity. "My lady," Catherine said warmly, extending both hands in greeting. "Demon has written of little else these past weeks but your intelligence and courage. I am so pleased to finally meet you. Welcome to Shadowmere. I hope you will come to think of this place as home." Elara took Catherine's hands, feeling the genuine warmth in her grip. "Thank you, Lady Catherine. Your brother has been most kind, and I am honored to be here." Catherine insisted on personally showing Elara to her quarters, linking their arms together as if they were old friends rather than strangers who had just met. As they walked through the fortress's stone corridors, Catherine maintained a steady stream of conversation, pointing out various rooms and introducing Elara to servants and residents they encountered along the way. Her warmth and enthusiasm were infectious, and Elara found herself relaxing despite the strangeness of her new surroundings. "Demon has told me much about you," Catherine said as they climbed a winding staircase to the upper floors of the keep. "About how you stood up to those men to protect that girl. About your intelligence and your courage. He admires you greatly, which is no small thing. My brother is not easily impressed, and he does not give his trust lightly. The fact that he brought you here speaks volumes about his faith in you." Elara felt warmth creep into her cheeks at Catherine's words. "Your brother has been most generous in his assessment of my abilities. I hope I can live up to his expectations." Catherine laughed, a bright musical sound that echoed off the stone walls. "Oh, I have no doubt you will. Demon has excellent judgment when it comes to people. It is one of the reasons our domain has thrived while others have crumbled. He sees potential where others see only limitations, and he nurtures that potential until it blooms into something extraordinary." They reached a heavy oak door, and Catherine pushed it open to reveal a spacious chamber that took Elara's breath away. It was far larger and more luxurious than anything she had expected, with a high ceiling crossed by dark beams, a stone fireplace already crackling with a welcoming fire, and tall windows that overlooked the valley below. The bed was enormous, covered in furs and woolen blankets dyed in rich colors of burgundy and deep blue. A writing desk stood near one window, already equipped with parchment, quills, and ink. Tapestries depicting forest scenes hung on the walls, and thick carpets covered the cold stone floor. "This is too much," Elara protested, turning to Catherine with wide eyes. "Surely there are others more deserving of such fine accommodations. I would be perfectly content with something simpler." Catherine shook her head firmly. "Nonsense. You are not a servant, Elara, but an honored member of Demon's inner circle. You will be advising him on matters that could determine the fate of everyone in this valley. You deserve quarters that reflect your importance and allow you the peace and comfort necessary to do your work effectively. Besides," she added with a mischievous smile, "these chambers are directly adjacent to Demon's own rooms. He wanted you close by so that you could confer easily whenever the need arose." The thought of being so near to Demon made Elara's pulse quicken, though she tried to keep her expression neutral. "That is very thoughtful of him. I appreciate the consideration." Catherine studied her for a moment, her intelligent eyes seeming to see more than Elara was comfortable revealing. "You care for him already, do not you? I can see it in your face when you speak of him, hear it in your voice. Do not be embarrassed, Elara. My brother is a remarkable man, and it would be strange if you did not feel drawn to him. The question is, what do you intend to do about these feelings? Elara turned away, moving to the window to stare out at the valley below, where the last light of day was fading into twilight. I intend to do nothing about them, she said quietly. I am here to serve as his advisor, not to complicate his life with unwanted affection. Besides, I have no reason to believe he sees me as anything more than a useful addition to his household. Men like Demon Thornheart do not fall in love with broken, discarded women like me. She heard Catherine move behind her, felt the younger woman's hand rest gently on her shoulder. Oh, Elara, you are so wrong about that. First, you are neither broken nor discarded. You are a survivor, a woman who has endured terrible injustice and emerged stronger for it. And second, you clearly do not see the way my brother looks at you. I watched him when he introduced us, saw the light in his eyes, the tenderness in his expression. He cares for you, Elara, perhaps more than he has allowed himself to care for anyone in a very long time. The question is whether you have the courage to let yourself care for him in return. Elara turned to face Catherine, tears threatening to spill down her cheeks. I am afraid, she whispered. I was married before, and I failed. I could not give my husband the one thing he needed from me, and he cast me aside like refuse. What if I fail Demon as well? What if I am incapable of being what he needs, whether as an advisor or as something more? Catherine pulled Elara into an embrace, holding her as she had seen Beatrice do weeks ago in Ravenshollow. Listen to me carefully. The failure was not yours, Elara. Your former husband was a fool who valued the wrong things and lost something precious because of his blindness. Demon is not that kind of man. He values intelligence, courage, loyalty, and compassion, all of which you possess in abundance. And as for children, well, that is in God's hands, is it not? If you and Demon were to build a life together and no children came, there are always orphans in need of loving homes, always ways to create a family if that is what you both desire. Do not let the cruelty of your past dictate the possibilities of your future. The words were like balm on old wounds, soothing hurts that Elara had thought would never heal. She allowed herself to cry, to release the pain and shame she had been carrying for so long, while Catherine held her and murmured words of comfort and encouragement. When the tears finally subsided, Elara pulled away and wiped her face with the back of her hand, managing a shaky smile. Thank you, she said softly. I needed to hear that. Needed someone to tell me that I am not as worthless as I have been made to feel. You are kind, Catherine, far kinder than I deserve. You deserve all the kindness in the world, Catherine replied firmly. And you will find it here, I promise you. Now let me have a bath drawn for you and some food brought up. You must be exhausted from the journey. Rest tonight, and tomorrow we can begin showing you how things work here at Shadowmere. True to her word, Catherine arranged for everything Elara needed. Within the hour, servants had filled a large wooden tub with hot water scented with herbs, and a tray of food had been set on the small table near the hearth. Elara sank gratefully into the bath, feeling the warmth seep into her travel-weary muscles and wash away the dust and fatigue of the long journey. She allowed herself to simply be, to exist in this moment of comfort and safety without worrying about what tomorrow might bring. After her bath, she ate the simple but delicious meal of roasted chicken, fresh bread, and winter vegetables, then dressed in a clean nightgown that had been laid out for her. The bed was as comfortable as it looked, the furs and blankets soft and warm, and she fell asleep almost as soon as her head touched the pillow, too exhausted even to dream. She woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and the sound of activity from the courtyard below. For a moment she was disoriented, unable to remember where she was, but then memory returned, and with it a sense of anticipation that made her heart race. Today would be her first full day at Shadowmere, her first chance to prove that Demon's faith in her had not been misplaced. A knock at the door announced the arrival of a young maid with fresh water and clean clothing. The girl who introduced herself as Anna helped Elara dress in a gown of deep crimson wool with black leather accents, far finer than anything she had worn in Ravenshollow. The dress fit perfectly, as if it had been made specifically for her, and Anna explained that Lady Catherine had commissioned it based on measurements Demon had provided. The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched Elara deeply. When she was ready, Anna led her down to the great hall where the morning meal was being served. The hall was a vast space with high ceilings and long tables where dozens of people sat eating and talking. At the head table on a raised dais sat Demon and Catherine, along with several others who Elara recognized from the journey north. Demon rose when he saw her enter, a smile transforming his face, and gestured for her to join them. "Elara, good morning," he said warmly as she approached. "I trust you slept well and found your quarters acceptable." "More than acceptable," Elara replied, taking the seat he indicated beside him. "They are beautiful, Demon. Far more luxurious than I expected or deserve. Thank you. You deserve far more than that," he said quietly, his gray eyes holding hers for a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity. Then he turned to the others at the table and made introductions. "You have already met my sister Catherine and Captain Meredith. This is Lord Garrett, who oversees our agricultural operations, and Lady Helena, who manages the household and ensures that Shadowmere runs smoothly. And this," he gestured to an older man with silver hair and keen blue eyes, "is Master Aldrich, my chief counselor and the closest thing I have to a father figure." Elara greeted each of them in turn, acutely aware that she was being evaluated and judged. These were the people who had built Shadowmere alongside Demon, who had been with him from the beginning. She was the newcomer, the outsider, and she would need to earn their trust and respect, just as she had earned Demon's. The meal passed pleasantly, with conversation ranging from the practical matters of running the estate to lighter topics of gossip and humor. Elara listened more than she spoke, absorbing information and trying to understand the dynamics of this community that would now be her home. After breakfast, Demon asked her to join him in his private study, where they could discuss her role in more detail. The study was a comfortable room lined with bookshelves filled with volumes on history, philosophy, military strategy, and law. A large desk dominated the center of the space, covered with maps and documents. Demon gestured for Elara to sit in one of the chairs before the fireplace while he poured wine for them both. "I wanted to speak with you privately," he began, handing her a cup and settling into the chair across from her, "about what I hope you can accomplish here and what challenges we face. But first, I need to know if you have any reservations, any doubts about your decision to come to Shadowmere. If you do, tell me now, and I will arrange safe passage back to Raven's Hollow with no hard feelings. This life is not easy, Elara, and the work I am asking of you will be demanding and sometimes dangerous. I need to know that you are truly committed before we proceed." Elara met his gaze steadily, drawing strength from the sincerity she saw there. "I have no reservations, Demon. When I left Thornmere, I was broken and lost, believing that I had no value beyond my ability to produce an heir. But slowly, through the kindness of people like Beatrice and now you, I have come to understand that I am more than the narrow role society tried to force me into. You have given me a chance to prove my worth, to use my mind and my skills in service of something greater than myself. I will not squander that opportunity. Whatever you need from me, whatever challenges we must face, I am ready." The relief and joy that flashed across Demon's face made her heart soar. He leaned forward, taking her hand in his, and the warmth of his touch sent shivers through her entire body. "Thank you," he said softly. "You cannot know what it means to me to hear you say that. I have been alone in this fight for so long, surrounded by loyal people but lacking someone who truly understands the complexities of the political battlefield we must navigate. With you by my side, I finally feel like we have a real chance of achieving the recognition and legitimacy we need to secure our future." Over the following weeks, Elara threw herself into her new role with fierce determination. Demon shared with her the extensive correspondence he had maintained with Prince Edward and various other nobles, along with intelligence reports gathered by his network of informants throughout the realm. She spent long hours in the study, poring over documents and crafting careful responses that walked the delicate line between showing appropriate deference to royal authority while maintaining Demon's position as an independent lord worthy of respect. The work was challenging in ways she had never anticipated. Every word had to be chosen with precision, every argument constructed to appeal to the specific interests and vanities of its intended recipient. Prince Edward, she learned, was a man of considerable intelligence, but also substantial pride. He wanted to be seen as a strong, decisive leader who could bring order to the realm's troubled borderlands, but he also needed to avoid appearing weak or manipulated by lesser nobles. Elara's letters emphasized how formal recognition of Demon's domain would demonstrate the prince's wisdom and strategic thinking, positioning him as a ruler who valued results over rigid adherence to tradition. Duke Harrington and his allies presented a different challenge. Their opposition to Demon was rooted in greed and fear that his success would inspire other commoners and minor nobles to challenge their authority. Elara worked with Demon to identify weaknesses in the Duke's position, inconsistencies in his arguments, and vulnerabilities that could be exploited. They sent carefully worded messages to other lords who had their own grievances against Harrington, building a coalition of support that would make it more difficult for him to move against Shadowmere without facing significant opposition. As Elara worked, she found herself spending increasing amounts of time with Demon. Their professional collaboration naturally extended into longer conversations over meals, walks through the fortress grounds, and quiet evenings by the fire in his study. She discovered that beneath his fearsome reputation lay a man of surprising depth and complexity. He quoted poetry, discussed philosophy, and showed a genuine interest in her thoughts and opinions on matters far beyond politics and strategy. One evening, as they sat reviewing the latest draft of a letter to Prince Edward, Demon set down his quill and looked at her with an expression she could not quite decipher. "May I ask you something personal, Elara? You need not answer if it makes you uncomfortable, but I find myself curious about something you mentioned when we first met." Elara set aside the parchment she had been reading, giving him her full attention. "Of course. What do you wish to know? You said that your marriage was annulled because you bore no children. But did you and Thomas ever truly try to build a life together? Or was your marriage nothing more than a political arrangement that never had a chance to become something real?" The question touched on painful memories, but Elara found that speaking of them to Demon was easier than it had ever been before. "At first I believed we could have something genuine. Thomas was handsome and charming during our courtship, and I thought perhaps we might grow to love each other given time. But after the wedding, everything changed. He became cold and distant, visiting my chambers only when duty required and showing no interest in me as a person. When months passed without a pregnancy, he began to blame me, to treat me as if I had deliberately failed him. And when the first year became 2 and then 3 with no heir, his disappointment turned to contempt. I became invisible in my own home, a ghost haunting corridors where I was no longer wanted." Demon's jaw tightened, and she saw anger flash in his gray eyes. He was a fool and a coward. "Marriage should be a partnership, Elara, not a transaction where one party is discarded when they fail to meet arbitrary expectations. You deserve so much better than the treatment you received." "Perhaps," Elara said softly, "but the experience taught me important lessons about my own strength and resilience. I learned that I could survive things I never thought possible, that I could rebuild my life from nothing and find purpose and meaning in unexpected places. In a strange way, being cast out from Thornmere was the best thing that could have happened to me, because it forced me to discover who I truly am beneath the roles society had assigned me." Demon reached across the desk, covering her hand with his own. The gesture was tender rather than presumptuous, a simple expression of comfort and connection. "You are remarkable. Do you know that? Most people would have been broken by what you endured, would have surrendered to bitterness and despair. But you took your pain and transformed it into strength. That is the mark of true courage." Elara felt tears prick at her eyes, but they were tears of gratitude rather than sorrow. "Thank you, Demon, for seeing me as I am, for believing in my worth when I had almost forgotten it myself. You have given me more than employment or a place to live. You have given me back my sense of purpose and dignity." They sat there for a long moment, hands clasped across the desk, neither speaking but both acutely aware of the connection growing between them. It was Catherine who finally broke the spell, knocking lightly on the door before entering with a message that had just arrived from one of Demon's scouts. The message brought troubling news. Duke Harrington had assembled an army and was marching toward the borderlands, claiming that he had received reports of bandit activity originating from Demon's territory and that he intended to restore order by force. It was a transparent pretext, but a dangerous one nonetheless. If Harrington's forces crossed into Shadowmere's domain, Demon would have to choose between fighting and risking open war or submitting to the Duke's authority and losing everything he had built. Demon immediately called a council of his senior advisors, and Elara found herself seated at the long table in the war room alongside Captain Meredith, Marcus, Lord Garrett, and Master Aldrich. Maps of the region were spread across the table, and markers indicated the reported position of Harrington's forces and the various defensive positions Demon's people could take. We cannot allow them to enter our lands unchallenged, Marcus argued, his scarred face grim. If we show weakness now, Harrington will see it as an invitation to take whatever he wants. We must meet his army at the border and make it clear that we will defend our territory with force if necessary. Captain Meredith nodded agreement. We have enough trained fighters to give Harrington pause, especially if we choose our ground wisely. The mountain passes can be defended by relatively small numbers against much larger forces. We can make it costly enough that he thinks twice about pressing the attack. But Master Aldrich shook his head, his weathered face troubled. Violence should be our last resort, not our first. Once blood is spilled, there will be no going back. Harrington will use any conflict as justification for even greater aggression, and Prince Edward may be forced to side with the Duke of the Realm against what he will be pressured to see as a rebel lord. We need to find another way. All eyes turned to Elara, and she felt the weight of their expectation like a physical pressure. This was why Demon had brought her here, to provide counsel in exactly this sort of situation. She took a deep breath, organizing her thoughts before speaking. Master Aldrich is right that we must avoid open conflict if possible, she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. But Marcus and Captain Meredith are also correct that we cannot appear weak or permit Harrington to simply march into our territory without consequence. What we need is a strategy that demonstrates our strength while simultaneously denying Harrington the justification he seeks for war. I propose we send an urgent message to Prince Edward, informing him of Harrington's movements and requesting that he intervene to prevent unnecessary bloodshed. Frame it as a loyal subject seeking royal justice rather than taking matters into our own hands. Demon leaned forward, his expression intent. Go on. At the same time, Elara continued, gaining confidence, we position our forces defensively at the border, making it clear we are prepared to defend ourselves but not engaging in any aggressive action. We invite representatives from the prince's court to come and investigate Harrington's claims about bandit activity, knowing they will find no evidence because the accusations are false. This puts Harrington in a difficult position. If he attacks us while we are demonstrably seeking peaceful resolution through royal authority, he becomes the aggressor and loses the moral high ground. If he backs down, he loses face and his allies may begin to question his judgment. Master Aldrich's eyes lit up with understanding and approval. It is a clever strategy. We turn Harrington's own tactics against him, using the very laws and customs he claims to uphold as weapons in our defense. It could work, Demon said thoughtfully, his gaze fixed on Elara with an intensity that made her breath catch. But it requires perfect execution and careful timing. The message to Prince Edward must be crafted with extreme care, and we need to ensure our defensive positions are strong enough to hold if Harrington ignores diplomatic niceties and attacks anyway. For the next several hours they worked together to refine the strategy and plan its implementation. Elara drafted the letter to Prince Edward, reading portions aloud for feedback and revision. She emphasized Demon's loyalty to the crown, his desire to avoid conflict that would disrupt the peace of the realm, and his willingness to submit to royal judgment regarding Harrington's accusations. She also subtly included references to Demon's military strength and the loyalty of his people, making it clear that while he sought peaceful resolution, he was far from defenseless. When the letter was complete and sealed with Demon's mark, the fastest rider was dispatched to carry it to the prince's court with all possible speed. Meanwhile, Marcus and Captain Meredith began mobilizing the defenders, sending out calls to the surrounding villages and preparing defensive positions at key points along the border. The atmosphere at Shadowmere transformed from peaceful productivity to controlled urgency, everyone understanding that the next few days could determine the fate of everything they had built. That night, Elara stood on the battlements of the keep, looking out over the valley that had become her home. The stars were brilliant in the clear sky, and a cold wind carried the scent of pine from the surrounding forests. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Demon approaching, his cloak billowing around him. You should be resting, he said gently, coming to stand beside her at the wall. Tomorrow will be demanding, and you need your strength. I could say the same to you, Elara replied with a small smile. Yet here you are, standing watch over your domain, when you could be sleeping in a warm bed. Demon was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. I cannot sleep when so much hangs in the balance. All these people, Elara, they depend on me to protect them, to make the right decisions that will keep them safe and secure. The thought that I might fail them, that my choices could lead to their suffering, weighs heavily on me. Elara moved closer, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. You will not fail them, demon. You have built something extraordinary here, a place where people who had nowhere else to turn have found safety and purpose. That did not happen by accident or luck. It happened because you are a leader who genuinely cares about those under your protection, who makes decisions based on their welfare rather than your own ambition. That is why they are loyal to you, why they will follow you even into uncertainty and danger. He turned to look at her, and in the moonlight his face seemed softer, more vulnerable than she had ever seen it. And what about you, Elara? Why do you stay? You could have remained safely in Raven's Hollow, building a quiet life free from the complications and dangers that come with being part of my world. Why did you choose to come here, to tie your fate to mine? The question hung in the air between them, and Elara knew that her answer would change everything. She could deflect, could offer some safe explanation about duty or gratitude or professional ambition, but standing there under the stars, with the man who had given her back her sense of worth and purpose, she found she could not hide behind comfortable lies. Because of you, she said softly, her voice barely audible over the wind. Because when I am with you, I feel like the woman I was always meant to be. You see me, demon, truly see me in a way no one else ever has. Not as a vessel for producing heirs, not as a useful tool to be employed and discarded, but as a person of value and capability. And somewhere along this journey, I have come to care for you in ways that terrify and exhilarate me in equal measure. Demon's breath caught at her words, and for a moment that seemed suspended in time. He simply stared at her, his gray eyes reflecting the starlight above. Then, with a tenderness that made Elara's heart ache, he reached up and cupped her face in his hands, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. Elara, he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. From the moment I saw you standing in that alley, defying those men to protect someone you did not even know, I felt something shift inside me. I have spent years building walls around my heart, telling myself that caring too deeply would make me vulnerable, would compromise my ability to lead and protect my people. But you walked into my life and shattered every defense I had constructed. You are brilliant, compassionate, brave, and beautiful beyond measure. I did not bring you here only for your political acumen, though that is invaluable. I brought you here because I could not bear the thought of you being anywhere but at my side. Tears streamed down Elara's cheeks as she leaned into his touch. I am afraid, demon. I have been broken before, cast aside and deemed worthless. What if I cannot be what you need? What if I fail you as I failed Thomas? Demon's expression hardened with anger at the mention of her former husband. You failed no one, Elara. Thomas Whitmore was a blind fool who could not recognize the treasure he possessed. And you are not the same woman who left Thornmere months ago. You are stronger now, wiser, more certain of your own worth. As for what I need, it is simple. I need you, exactly as you are. Your intelligence, your compassion, your courage, your laughter, your tears, all of it. I have never wanted anything or anyone as much as I want you. He lowered his head slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, but Elara rose on her toes to meet him halfway. Their lips touched gently at first, a tentative exploration that quickly deepened into something more passionate and urgent. Elara felt as though she were falling and flying simultaneously, every nerve in her body alive with sensation. This was nothing like the cold, dutiful kisses Thomas had bestowed upon her. This was fire and lightning, connection and desire, two souls recognizing each other across the darkness. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Demon rested his forehead against hers, his arms wrapped around her waist as if he feared she might disappear if he released her. "Marry me, Elara," he said, his voice fierce and tender. "Not because of duty or political alliance, but because I love you and cannot imagine my life without you in it. Be my wife, my partner, my equal in all things. Help me build this domain into something that will endure for generations, a place where people are valued for who they are rather than what accidents of birth determine their worth. Say yes, and make me the happiest man in all the realm." Elara's heart soared, but even in the midst of her joy, practical concerns surfaced. "Demon, I may never be able to give you children. The fault may lie with me, and if we marry, you risk ending up in the same position as Thomas, with no heir to continue your line. Demon shook his head firmly. I told you before, Elara, there are always children in need of loving homes. If we are blessed with children of our own blood, we will cherish them. If not, we will find other ways to build our family. Catherine's children, when she marries, will be my nieces and nephews. We can adopt orphans from among our people, raise them as our own. What matters is not whose blood runs in their veins, but the love and guidance we provide. And even if we had no children at all, I would rather spend my life with you and die without an heir than marry someone else for the sake of producing offspring. You are not a broodmare, Elara. You are the woman I love, and that is enough. More than enough. His words broke through the last of her resistance, washing away the shame and fear that had haunted her for so long. She threw her arms around his neck, laughing and crying simultaneously. Yes, she said, her voice ringing with certainty and joy. Yes, Demon, I will marry you. I will be your wife and your partner, and together we will face whatever challenges come our way. I love you, with all my heart and soul. I love you. They kissed again, longer and deeper, oblivious to the cold wind and the watching stars. When they finally returned to the keep, hand in hand, they found Catherine waiting for them with a knowing smile. I take it congratulations are in order? She asked, her eyes dancing with delight. Demon grinned, an expression of pure happiness that transformed his usually serious face. Elara has agreed to become my wife. We will be married as soon as this business with Harrington is resolved. Catherine let out a joyful cry and embraced them both. I knew it. From the moment I saw you together, I knew you were meant for each other. Oh, this is wonderful news. We must plan the wedding, and there is so much to do. But first, we must ensure that Duke Harrington does not ruin everything with his foolish aggression. The mention of Harrington brought them back to the immediate crisis, but somehow the threat seemed less daunting now. Elara felt stronger, more confident, knowing that she and Demon would face it together as partners in every sense of the word. The next morning brought news from the scouts. Harrington's army had reached the border but had stopped there, apparently waiting for something. The answer came that afternoon when a royal messenger arrived at Shadowmere, bearing a letter sealed with Prince Edward's own mark. The message was brief but significant. The prince acknowledged receipt of Demon's letter and expressed concern about reports of potential conflict in the borderlands. He was dispatching a delegation led by his personal representative, Lord Chancellor Pembroke, to investigate the situation and mediate between the parties. Until the delegation arrived and completed its investigation, all parties were commanded to maintain peace and refrain from hostile action under penalty of royal displeasure. It was exactly the outcome Elara had hoped for when crafting her letter to the prince. Harrington could not attack without directly defying a royal command, which would undermine his position and potentially bring him into conflict with the crown itself. And the investigation would reveal the falseness of his accusations about bandits, further weakening his case against Shadowmere. Over the next week, preparations were made for the arrival of the royal delegation. The fortress was cleaned and decorated, additional provisions were brought in to properly host the distinguished guests, and Demon worked with Elara to prepare documentation that would demonstrate the legitimacy and prosperity of his domain. They gathered testimonials from villagers whose lives had been improved by Demon's protection, records of trade and taxation that showed proper governance, and evidence that far from harboring bandits, Shadowmere had actually reduced criminal activity in the region by providing security and opportunity to those who might otherwise have turned to lawlessness. When Lord Chancellor Pembroke arrived with his entourage, he proved to be a shrewd and observant man in his middle years, with intelligent eyes that missed little. Demon and Elara received him in the Great Hall, and she was immediately impressed by Demon's performance. He was respectful without being obsequious, confident without being arrogant, striking exactly the right balance to gain the Chancellor's respect. Over the following days, Pembroke conducted his investigation with thoroughness and fairness. He interviewed residents of Shadowmere, examined the records Elara had prepared, and even traveled to some of the outlying villages to see conditions for himself. Elara accompanied him on several of these visits, answering his questions with honesty and intelligence, carefully guiding the conversation to highlight the positive aspects of Demon's governance, while acknowledging challenges in ways that demonstrated thoughtful leadership rather than weakness. Duke Harrington was summoned to present his evidence of bandit activity, but when pressed for specifics, his accusations fell apart under scrutiny. The incidents he cited were either unverified rumors, cases that had occurred outside Demon's territory, or situations that had actually been resolved by Demon's intervention. Pembroke's expression grew increasingly skeptical as the Duke floundered, and Elara could see the moment when the Chancellor made his decision about where the truth lay. On the final day of the investigation, Pembroke gathered all parties in the Great Hall of Shadowmere to deliver his findings. The room was packed with people from both sides, tension thick in the air as everyone waited to hear the royal judgment. "I have completed my investigation," Pembroke began, his voice carrying clearly through the silent hall, "and I have found no credible evidence to support Duke Harrington's allegations of bandit activity originating from Lord Thornhart's domain. Indeed, the evidence suggests quite the opposite. Lord Thornhart has established effective governance over these borderlands, providing security and prosperity to people who were previously vulnerable to genuine criminal elements. The reduction in lawlessness in this region since Lord Thornhart took control is documented and undeniable." Harrington's face flushed with anger, but he said nothing, clearly aware that arguing would only make his position worse. Pembroke continued, "Furthermore, I am impressed by the systems of justice, trade, and community welfare that have been established here. This is not a lawless haven for outcasts, as some have claimed, but a well-ordered society that operates according to principles of fairness and mutual obligation. Therefore, it is my recommendation to Prince Edward that Lord Demon Thornhart be formally recognized as the legitimate ruler of these borderlands, with all the rights and responsibilities that come with such recognition. In exchange, Lord Thornhart will pledge fealty to the crown and agree to provide military support when called upon, as is customary for lords of the realm." A cheer went up from the Shadowmere contingent, while Harrington and his supporters looked stunned and furious. Demon stood, his hand finding Elara's beneath the table and squeezing it tightly. "I accept these terms with gratitude and honor," Demon declared, his voice resonant with emotion. "I pledge my loyalty to Prince Edward and to the crown, and I vow to govern these lands with justice and wisdom, always placing the welfare of my people above personal ambition. Thank you, Lord Chancellor, for your fairness and thoroughness in this matter." Pembroke nodded approvingly. "The formal documents will be drawn up and sent to you within the month, along with Prince Edward's seal confirming your status. Until then, Duke Harrington, you and your forces are to withdraw from the border and cease all hostile actions toward Lord Thornhart and his domain. Any violation of this command will be considered an act of defiance against the crown itself. Do you understand?" Harrington's jaw clenched, but he managed a stiff nod. "I understand, Lord Chancellor. We will withdraw immediately." After the hall emptied and the formal proceedings concluded, Demon pulled Elara into his private study, closing the door behind them. He lifted her off her feet and spun her around, both of them laughing with relief and joy. "We did it," he said, setting her down but keeping his arms around her waist. "Everything we worked for, everything we hoped to achieve, it has all come to fruition. And it would not have been possible without you, Elara. Your strategy, your letters, your presence during the investigation, all of it was crucial to our success." Elara smiled up at him, her heart so full of happiness she thought it might burst. "We did it together, as partners. That is how it should be, how it will always be from this day forward. Speaking of which," Demon said, his expression turning tender, "I believe we have a wedding to plan. Now that the threat from Harrington has been neutralized and our position is secure, there is nothing to prevent us from making our union official. What say you to a wedding 1 month from today? That will give Catherine time to organize the kind of celebration our people deserve, and allow us to send word to our allies and friends throughout the realm." 1 month sounds perfect," Elara agreed, reaching up to touch his face. "Though I confess I would marry you tomorrow if circumstances permitted. I have waited long enough for happiness, and now that I have found it, I am eager to begin our life together in truth." The wedding, when it finally took place on a bright spring morning 4 weeks later, was a celebration unlike anything Shadowmere had ever seen. People came from all the villages and settlements throughout Demon's domain, along with representatives from allied territories, and even a few nobles who had been won over by Pembroke's positive report. The great hall was decorated with fresh flowers and ribbons, and long tables groaned under the weight of food and drink prepared for the feast that would follow the ceremony. Elara wore a gown of ivory silk and lace that Catherine had commissioned from the finest seamstress in the region, its bodice embroidered with silver thread that caught the light like stars. Her auburn hair was arranged in an elaborate style, woven with white roses, and around her neck she wore a pendant that had belonged to Demon's mother, a silver medallion engraved with the Thornheart family crest. She had never felt more beautiful, more valued, more loved. Demon stood waiting for her at the altar, dressed in black leather and velvet with a cloak of midnight blue lined with silver fur. When their eyes met across the hall, Elara saw in his gaze everything she had ever dreamed of finding: love, respect, desire, and the promise of a future built on mutual partnership and devotion. Father Benedict performed the ceremony, his gentle voice carrying the ancient words that would bind them together as husband and wife. When the moment came for them to exchange vows, Demon took both of Elara's hands in his and spoke from his heart. "Elara, you came into my life when I had almost forgotten what it meant to hope for something beyond mere survival. You reminded me that strength and gentleness are not opposites but complements, that true power lies not in domination, but in lifting others up and helping them discover their own worth. I vow to honor you, to cherish you, to stand beside you as your equal partner in all things. I vow to see you, truly see you, every day for the rest of our lives, and to ensure that you never again doubt your value or your place in this world. I love you, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." Tears streamed down Elara's face as she spoke her own vows. "Demon, you saved me, not from physical danger, though you did that too, but from the despair and shame that threatened to destroy me. You saw past the labels others had placed upon me and recognized the woman I truly am. You gave me not just a home but a purpose, not just employment but partnership, not just security but love. I vow to stand with you through whatever challenges we face, to use my gifts in service of the vision we share, to be your companion, your counselor, your lover, and your friend. I love you with all that I am, and I will love you for all the days of my life." When Father Benedict pronounced them husband and wife and gave Demon permission to kiss his bride, the hall erupted in cheers and applause. The kiss they shared was tender and passionate, a promise and a celebration, witnessed by hundreds of people who had come to honor their union and the bright future it represented. The feast that followed lasted well into the night, with music and dancing and countless toasts to the health and happiness of the new Lord and Lady of Shadowmere. Elara danced with Demon, with Marcus and Lord Garrett, and even old Master Aldrich, her face aching from smiling so much. Catherine embraced her repeatedly, welcoming her officially as a sister and whispering that she had never seen Demon so happy. As the celebration finally began to wind down and guests started seeking their beds, Demon led Elara away from the hall to the chambers they would now share. The rooms had been prepared with care, fresh flowers filling the air with sweet fragrance, candles casting a warm glow over furnishings that had been polished to a shine. But Elara barely noticed any of it. Her attention focused entirely on the man who was now her husband. They came together with passion and tenderness, discovering each other in the intimate ways reserved for husband and wife. Demon was patient and attentive, ensuring her pleasure before seeking his own, and Elara marveled at how different this was from the cold, perfunctory encounters she had endured with Thomas. This was love expressed through physical connection, two people joining not just their bodies but their hearts and souls. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the great bed, Demon traced lazy patterns on Elara's bare shoulder and spoke softly in the darkness. "Do you have any regrets, my love? Any second thoughts about binding yourself to a controversial lord of the borderlands?" Elara turned to face him, her emerald eyes shining with certainty and joy. "Not a single one. This, here with you, is exactly where I am meant to be. We have built something beautiful together, Demon, and we will continue to build it for the rest of our lives. A place where people are valued for who they are, where love matters more than bloodlines, where two people who were both cast out by society have found not just refuge but triumph. This is our story, and it is only beginning." Demon kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips, each touch a wordless affirmation of his love and devotion. "Our story," he agreed, "and whatever chapters lie ahead, we will write them together." In the months and years that followed, Shadowmere continued to prosper under their joint leadership. Prince Edward's formal recognition brought increased trade and legitimacy, and other nobles began to grudgingly accept Demon's position. Duke Harrington, discredited by the investigation, faded into obscurity, his schemes and ambitions thwarted by the very customs and laws he had tried to manipulate. Elara proved to be exactly the partner Demon needed, her political acumen and diplomatic skills helping to navigate the complex relationships with neighboring territories. She established schools throughout the domain, ensuring that children of all backgrounds could receive education. She created systems for resolving disputes fairly and supporting those in need. And she did all of this while remaining Demon's most trusted counselor and beloved wife. 2 years after their wedding, they welcomed their first child, a daughter with Demon's gray eyes and Elara's auburn hair. The pregnancy had been unexpected, a gift that Elara had not dared to hope for, and when the midwife placed the tiny, perfect infant in her arms, she wept tears of joy and gratitude. They named her Catherine, after Demon's sister, and she grew into a bright, curious child who showed every sign of inheriting her parents' intelligence and compassion. More children followed, 2 sons and another daughter, and Demon and Elara also took in several orphans, raising them as their own just as Demon had once promised they would. Their family became a symbol of everything Shadowmere represented, a place where love and worth were not determined by birth or tradition, but by the content of one's character and the depth of one's heart. On a summer evening many years later, Elara stood once again on the battlements of Shadowmere, looking out over the prosperous valley that had become her true home. Demon came to stand beside her, his hair now touched with silver at the temples but his eyes as bright and loving as ever. Their children's laughter drifted up from the courtyard below, mingling with the sounds of a community at peace. "Do you ever think about that day in the alley?" Demon asked, slipping his arm around her waist. "When we first met?" Elara leaned into him, feeling the familiar warmth and strength of his presence. "Sometimes. It seems like a lifetime ago, and yet I remember it as clearly as if it were yesterday. I was so lost then, so uncertain of my worth and my future. I never could have imagined that defending one frightened girl would lead to all of this, to everything we have built together." "I knew," Demon said softly. "The moment I saw you standing up to those men, I knew you were someone extraordinary, someone worth fighting for, worth building a life with, and I have never regretted the choice to pursue you, to convince you to take a chance on me and on this dream we shared." Elara turned to face him, her emerald eyes reflecting the golden light of sunset. "I was cast out for being barren, deemed worthless by a man who could not see past his own narrow ambitions, but that rejection, as painful as it was, led me here, to you, to this life, to the understanding that my worth was never determined by my ability to produce an heir, but by the strength of my character and the love in my heart. Thomas Whitmore thought he was discarding something broken. Instead, he set me free to become who I was always meant to be." Demon pulled her close, kissing her with all the passion and devotion of their wedding day. "The Prince of Shadows fell in love with a woman the world had rejected," he murmured against her lips. "And together, we proved that sometimes the greatest love stories begin in the darkest moments, when 2 wounded souls find each other and choose to build something beautiful from the ashes of their pain." As the sun set over Shadowmere, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Elara and Demon stood together, hands clasped, hearts united, living proof that love, real love, could triumph over rejection, prejudice, and despair. Their story, which had begun with heartbreak and exile, had transformed into a tale of redemption, partnership, and enduring devotion that would be told for generations to come. And in the great hall below, where their children played and their people gathered in fellowship and joy, the legacy of their love continued to grow, a testament to the truth that sometimes being cast out is not an ending, but the beginning of something far more wonderful than anything that came before.